The cultures of the ancient Near East were all about the liminal, about the in-between. The people who in antiquity inhabited today's Middle East accepted in-betweenness, the fuzzy, sometimes scary areas of life, to a degree that we today, most of us today, generally do not. It was a place of mixed and hybrid beings who mediated between natural and supernatural worlds, between inhabitable and hostile spaces, between good and evil, between life and death, between the seen and the unseen. It was also a place of omens and divination, of reading entrails, of magic. In fact, the practicing of magic was a real and viable means of navigating one's world in this long-ago realm. And ambiguity or in-betweenness is what allowed that magic to work then as now. These ancients embraced the liminal in the most imaginative of ways. The very terms for the physical geography of the ancient Near East has always been halfway between here and there. The ancient Greeks named it Mesopotamia, or the land between the two rivers, the Tigris and Euphrates, Meso meaning literally between or middle, Potamus, river. Dominant world powers since then have repeatedly and consistently referred to the region in the language of relativity, variously calling it the Levant, or where the sun rises relative to Europe, the Near East, once again near to Europe, Western Asia, or the western part of an Asia centered further east, but a term that is at least relative within an existing acknowledged continent, or as we know it today, the Middle East. And here, I personally have never been sure the middle of exactly what or where, but certainly relative to something or somewhere else. So clearly, these maps are not purely physical. Maps are rarely truly objective. Yet, in most current renderings of a world map, this place, the Middle East, is very much in the center of it all. A map does exist on which Babylon is cast as the center of the known world. Shown here as a circular space on a clay tablet, it was created by the Babylonians themselves when they were the dominant power in roughly the 6th century BC. On this map, you can see that the ancient Babylonians did what power has done time and again throughout history: determine the narrative. The United States did it in Iraq when it occupied the country starting in 2003 and symbolically built a military helipad smack in the middle of the ancient site of the same fabled Babylon. ISIS is doing it today through social media and its brutal and horrendous tactics on the ground. Control the story and control history. Control the image and also control the history. But today, I'd like to tell you about the ancient Near East that I fell in love with, the place where so many of humankind's greatest cultural and technological achievements originated. This is where we find the world's first settlements and cities, accounting and writing, literary epics and law codes, numerical and scientific systems, as well as empires. All extraordinary feats of human ingenuity, the very beginnings of human progress, and they began there in that place over 5,000 years ago. Imagine for a moment making the conceptual leap of inventing writing. Yeah, writing. Writing. It's staggering. All the more staggering because writing is what set the stage for who we are and what we are able to do still today. And because writing is still as relevant and as important as ever. teaching children and adults, for that matter, how to read and write remains a critical challenge in far too many parts of the world. So given that, given all that, this place, whatever its name, should forever be considered a, if not the, center of the world, not a place between places. It is one of the primary wellsprings of our collective history. Its contributions are foundational to all humanity. And then there is the mesmerizing in-betweenness of the fantastic images that were produced there and that were so instrumental in constructing its magical reality. Images that depict nature in all its beauty and power, executed with both reverence and fear. And humankind's place in that wilderness, shown here on a cylinder seal, a remarkable category of object iconic to the ancient Near East, small in scale, carved on a round surface, in mirror image, and such that its narrative scene repeats seamlessly when rolled out on clay, and is reproducible an infinite number of times, both eternal and fleeting, and somewhere in between. A man, no, he's not an elf, although he is only 7 inches tall, a man wearing the horns of an ibex on his head and the wings of a bird of prey draped around his shoulders, as a means of navigating, of harnessing those two powerful forces of nature, while a kneeling silver bull performs a ritual offering as if it were human. Humans taking on animal characteristics and animals taking on human ones, a tantalizing expression of navigating between worlds. And not, I might add, unlike our modern conception of a superhero. Performative images, images that were not merely the representations of a person or thing, but were considered a real and viable presence of that person or thing. The making of images was a magically meaningful act in the ancient Near East, so that in the case of these two statues, they literally performed perpetual prayer before the gods on behalf of the people who commissioned them. Once made, and by way of their very making or becoming, these images were as alive as their biological counterparts. Now that's pretty liminal. The 3,000 plus gods and goddesses of the ancient Near East could appear in human form, such as this naked goddess who represented the many different cultures and beliefs for which this ancient world was known. Or they could manifest as symbols or animals. This was a tremendously imaginative world in which images rarely had a single shape or meaning. It reveled in ambiguity and in multiplicity. Like the famous lion panels from Babylon, which protected and guarded the processional way to the Ishtar Gate. Except that in this case, the mane and the ruff turned into wings, into a wing, making it very likely that this was a supernatural, magical being. And the beloved winged beasts who guarded the thresholds, the most liminal of spaces, all while they themselves were liminal, part human, part animal, and part divine. Their 5 legs, an artistic convention so funny and fascinating to us, very cleverly allowed them to function conceptually between 2 places, both striding towards us and past us. So you see how this world existed between the enchanted and the strange. But it is an in-betweenness that was and still is so very rich, that reminds us that one culture's in-between is another's center, and that the past is as essential as the present and as the future in its turn promises to be. However, it was the world of the ancient Near East that was and still is the alpha to the rest. So we must do a better job of studying it and of teaching it and of understanding it and protecting it, preserving it and honoring it, both the culture and its living, now suffering descendants at whatever cost. It has become a moral responsibility. This beautiful, magical, creative, originary world and its people are in terrible crisis, stuck in the very, very worst kind of in-between. We cannot let its many fascinating and important stories become a single negative one. I'd like to leave you with a final and perhaps more hopeful image, and that is of the Mesopotamians' conception of their own past, or earlier time as they called it. For them, the past lay before them or faced them, while the future was conceived as lying behind them. They proceeded, so to speak, into the future facing backwards, their attention and gazes directed at the origin of all existence. Today, we tend to do the opposite. We look forward into the future, while our past often lies much too passively behind us. So we too might do well walking into our futures with our eyes more firmly fixed on our extraordinary and collective past, on the very epicenter of our earlier time. Thank you very much.